Hey everyone, if you watched my recent video where I made the Valentine's Day chocolate boxes, you heard me say that they were an accident. This is what I actually had set out to do. I've been asked to make several shallow dishes or trays for some Valentine's Day decorations. In this video, I'm using a scrap piece of spalted poplar as my test piece. Whenever I'm making more than one of something, I try and make templates or jigs to help with the consistency of the size and the shape. In this case, I decided to make a custom router table sled. And since I'm making this custom, but for something that I could see maybe making again in the future, I wanted the size to be something that I could quickly get my hands on for the boards. So the spalted poplar I cut down to 9¼ by 9¼ and that way if I want to make it again, I can buy some off-the-shelf 1x10s which are sanded down to 9¼ and all I need to do is cut it to 9¼ and they will plop right in place. And here I am taking a piece of plywood that I had that I'll be using as the router table sled. I decided to make the base be about 15 inches by 15 inches, kind of arbitrary, but I wanted to have more space than I needed. I drew a center line and I put my heart templates on there. The larger heart is what the actual router bowl's outside diameter will be, and the inner heart is what the inside of this router bowl will be. So I just grabbed a spade bit to get a hole, and I used my hand jigsaw to cut out the heart shape. So when I'm cutting this out, I try and get as close to my line as I can, but I'm going to be using my spindle sander to get a really accurate and smooth shape. So after I did my sanding, it was time to lay out the braces for the workpiece. I measured carefully from the center out and figured out where I wanted my boards to be. I glued one in, and then I took my workpiece and added some blue painter's tape to it. That thickens up the piece, but I won't actually keep that tape on there when I'm doing the work. I just want it to be a little thick while I'm making the jig, or extra wide while I'm making the jig. That way I can get the piece in and out easily. I don't want it to be so tight that I have to use a hammer or something. And it looked good. I glued in the second piece, and I used my Ryobi Airstrike to put the brad nails in. Alright, so after I get these two pieces in, I'm kind of like halfway there, I needed to get a top and bottom brace, and I just had some more scraps that cut from that piece of plywood. Just a matter of making sure that they fit in and cut them down on the miter saw. So I just used the same blue painter's tape as before to make sure I had a little bit of extra space going from the top and bottom, glued these two braces in. So at this point, you could almost go ahead and use it, but I've kind of experienced before when I made some of these where I made them too small, or I wish I had more room for my hands. And since I had more of the scrap plywood, I decided to make some handles for it. I have a way I like to make handles where I drill 2 holes at either end with my Forstner bits, and then depending on what kind of handle it is, I'll either use my hand jigsaw or I have a scroll saw that I might use to cut out the handles. But in this case, because it's just for a jig, I cut into my handle from the side and use my bandsaw. Bandsaw is just a lot faster. I'm not all that worried about that little entrance cut. It would be great if I didn't have that there, and I guess I could have used my hand jigsaw to do it, but the bandsaw is way more convenient for this type of thing, and I mean, you can see how quickly I was able to do that. I did 2 of them in probably less than a minute. So I glue them in, I use the brad nails again, and then I have 2 really good handles for holding this sled when I go to do my project. So at this point, I was starting to think, how is I going to hold the workpiece down while I was doing the routing? Because I wanted to have, one hand on each handle. There's 2 hands already taken up. I'm not going to be able to use a push block like I have in the past. So I just grabbed the scrap little pieces of plywood and I screwed them at an angle to hold the poplar in place, and it worked super well. I could not get it out if I wanted to. So next up was to bring the sled over to the router table and to get everything set up. I used the CMT 1¼ inch diameter router bowl bit for this project, and I'm also using the CMT router bit extension. I'll link both of those in the description. So probably one of the big drawbacks of using a router table sled on your router table like this is that drop in. So I just use a Sharpie, I mark where I want that corner to be, and every time I go to drop in, I make sure the corner of my sled will be right at that mark. That way I don't drop the sled itself on the router bit, which 1 could be dangerous, but 2 will ruin the whole custom pattern I've made. Each time I raise up my router bit, I do it about a 1/16 of an inch. It might be a little bit heavy. Ended up being, I think it was seven times that I lifted up this bit, and I ended up going in a 1/2 inch into my workpiece, and I never had a problem where it was bogging down the router or it caught too hard. It didn't rip anything out. It worked really well going slow. Here's the moment of truth. I take off those little screw down clamps, pull out my piece, and it looks good. So that's with no sanding. That's how smooth it comes out with this bit. And now the next step is to actually cut out the heart shape. I have another pattern I'm using, and I just trace it on. This camera angle actually is pretty neat for seeing the board itself. It was a really dark piece of poplar, and the spalting, kind of right where we're looking now, did make the wood a little bit weak and powdery. So when I get to the finish where I'm sanding it all off, it has a little bit of a groove and divots to it, but honestly I think it gave it a lot of character. You can kind of see where I was hitting the end grain inside the bowl with the router bit, but it all smoothed up really well, probably because it's poplar and it's pretty easy to sand. I did the roundovers just to give it a little bit of a softer edge. So second to the last step is to sand before I polyurethane. I like to sand to about 220, and I find that gives me a smooth enough surface for the polyurethane because I sand when I polyurethane too. I decided to use polyurethane in this because we're not going to use it for food. I just wanted to give it as much protection as possible. It's probably going to get pens, pencils, car keys, that kind of stuff in it pretty much for the month of February, and then get thrown into a drawer again. When I polyed it, it went super dark. So I was surprised to see that, and it was kind of interesting. Almost looks like walnut. And then that's it. Almost dry. A little anxious. I just wanted to see what it looked like. Thanks for watching.